Today we are running a reboot of one of the problems we have pointed out a few days ago, which is the disparity in gear and rewards between Mythic Plus and Raiding after the discovery that Blizzard extended the mid-track gear from 4 out of 4 to 6 out of 6. So we pointed out this one being a large gap last time. Now, in just a couple of days, we have gotten a slight improvement, right? The slight improvement is that Blizzard announced that the crafted gear is actually now going to be reaching 636 item level. When we checked this the last time, the crafted gear was stopping at 629, meaning that it was going to be 10 item levels weaker than a max level raid gear piece, and only three item levels higher than the best upgraded gear from Mythic Plus end of dungeon drop. Right now, instead, it's back to its old power. It's back to only being one upgrade level below the best raid gear, only 3 item levels below. So this is already better now for Mythic Plus players, because it means that every couple of weeks you get to get a 636 item from crafting. So it is already a pretty good way to keep up and catch up to the Mythic raid gear power level. However, of course, crafted gear, you can't craft your tier pieces. You can't craft your top DPS weapons, your trinkets. Those things are not really craftable, at least the best ones anyways, so it will still leave you with a problem. And then you still have the problem of the cost of your crest upgrading being much higher than a Mythic Raider. Now, in these past few days, there's been a divide between the community amongst the players. Some of them were busy attacking each other, the raiding side and the Mythic Plus side, accusing each other of presumed advantages in the game, and then there was the other side more busy trying to find a solution, something to make every side happy. Now, we have to start with one misconception, which is the amount of loot. This seemed to be one of the more easy accusations flung around, the fact that now Mythic Raiders are gonna be 20 or even 30 item levels ahead of Mythic Plus players by week 2 because of the amount of gear they can get. Now, the average Mythic Raid boss, excluding the special ones with tokens, is gonna drop 4 items. So if in week 1 your Mythic guild is somewhat successful, they will kill 3 bosses. That's 12 items. That's 12 items for 20 players in the raid and about 24 to 25 players you have in your roster. So that's barely half an item per player on week 1. In week 2, let's just say you're doing very well, you're running around the Hall of Fame level of guild, you're killing 6 bosses in week 2. That's 20 straight items plus, I think, 2 different tokens extra. That's like 22 items, 23 items in a week on a roster of 23, 24, 25 people. So it's barely 1 item per player on week 2. So, by the end of the first 2 weeks, the one advantage a Mythic Raider got over a Mythic Plus only player is 1.5 item worth of item level in this level of gear. 1.5 items. That is not really a significant advantage. Don't forget that, for example, while the Mythic Raider was busy Mythic Raiding for 4 nights a week, a Mythic Plus only player could have just spammed Mythic Plus for 4 nights a week. And with about 16 hours done of Mythic Plus and about at least 20 keys completed, you could have gotten 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 items. So, an average of 8 items at 613 item level on your gear versus 1.5 items at 626, the winner would be the one who spammed Mythic Plus, not the Mythic Raider who got 1.5 piece of gear from the raid. This then brings us to the other complaint or problem or argument, which is the raiders who do Mythic Plus versus the Mythic Plus players who do the raid. There is the point that for raiders who are already raiding, it's much easier to just drop down in Mythic Plus, maybe with your guildies, and do a bunch of keys to power up your character for the raid, versus many players who only do Mythic Plus because they literally can't raid, for example. They don't have a fixed schedule, they can't commit that amount of time, maybe in the evening, to raid, etc, etc, so they couldn't even raid in a Mythic difficulty setting, even if they wanted to. So the more likely scenario is that after the 4 nights a week where the Mythic Raider has done his Mythic Raiding, then he will also go down and do Mythic Plus and get this bunch of gear, like we mentioned the Mythic Plus player getting. So in the end, it would be the Mythic Plus player getting a bunch of 613 gear from Mythic Plus 9s or 10s versus the Mythic Raider getting this gear and then a whole bunch of 613 gear because he also did Mythic Plus keys. Because we have been saying so far Mythic Plus player or Mythic Plus only player, whereas that concept for raiding is much less common. A Mythic Raid only player. You know, how many Mythic Raiders do you know log in 5 minutes before the raid and log out the game 5 minutes after the raid? You know, a lot of them 3, 4 or 5 months into the season, for sure. But at the beginning of the season, the very high chance of these players to do everything they can to get any advantages for their raiding power is very common. And that's another one of the accusations that have been thrown around in the community, that raiders will do whatever it takes, in a sense, to be able to get a lead, a power lead for raiding. Whether it is spamming keys in Mythic Plus, farming Azerite power or artifact power, farming any type of content for dropping legendaries in Legion, picking dirt for 12 hours to get enough rep with the Dragon Scale Expedition to get a single item that will be obsolete in a week, or farming 20 hours of Maruk Centaur's hunts to get a single chest piece that will be replaced the first day you step into normal raid. For those who remember even season 1 of Shadowlands, where PvP could actually get you pretty good gear as well for PvE content. Whereas this type of commitment, this type of try-harding doesn't seem to be nearly as prevalent in players who do Mythic Plus only. The accusation was Mythic Plus players practically want to play like this was a 5v5 shooter or mobile lobby, where you log in, select your character and enter immediately inside a Mythic Plus key, and that's all you do. Whereas the Mythic Plus Raider perhaps has more of a boomer mindset, where the preparation, everything that comes before getting into the raid, between getting prepared for the raid bosses, farming everything you need to farm, grinding everything that can give you some power before you actually enter the raid, seems to be something more natural and accepted. So it does leave the question of how can you demand to get the same amount of gear and the same amount of power of someone who, on top of raiding Mythic, does plenty of other things to get their power, whereas you expect to just do nothing but Mythic Plus and expect to have the same power of that other player. So this left us to the part about the suggestions. How do you fix this problem? Now, one of the most logical suggestions was, well, it's simple. Just extend the amount of rewards you can get on key level difficulty. Because since the inception of Mythic Plus, the limit, the max item level reward for Mythic Plus was always easily reachable by players who were, competitive in Mythic Plus. Whether it was back in older expansion stopping at plus 10, or then the rewards stopping at plus 15, now the rewards stopping at plus 20, now we are back to the rewards stopping at plus 10. These limits, these thresholds would be reached rather easily by the community. So this would be the equivalent of a heroic raid, right? It would be the equivalent of if in a raiding setting all the loot stopped at the last boss of heroic, and then you only did Mythic for the rating. You only did Mythic for your raid ranking practically, and Mythic didn't give you any higher loot than heroic raid, right? That would be the equivalent of Mythic Plus loot capping at plus 10, when you have people pushing plus 22s right now. So one of the suggestions was just stretch the limit of Mythic Plus loot higher. Just like you have, 0.2% of raiders killing the last couple of bosses, then give us the same rewards of those Mythic Raiders for the 0.2% of Mythic Plus players reaching certain key levels. For example, in our graph, this one could be 11 to 12. So now you save yourself an upgrade level cost. This could be 13 to 14, so now you save yourself 2 upgrade costs, and then the breakpoint of clearing a 16 key or higher would start dropping Myth 1 track. So now you have more sources of Myth track gear as a Mythic Plus player, instead of having to wait once a week every time from the Great Vault. This would feel more fair. Now suddenly you have more players in Mythic Plus who did put the same amount of time to push and to try to learn every Mythic Plus dungeon, trying to master it to a certain difficulty level, somewhat on par with Mythic Plus, to be given somewhat similar rewards. After all, these are, for example, the amount of characters, not players, sure, but the amount of different characters in this season of Mythic Plus, 20 million. But then if you look at the characters above a 15, it's down to 380,000. That's like 1.8%. So out of all of the characters in Mythic Plus this season, only 1.8% were doing a 15 or higher. And then for laughs and for giggles, 20 plus, it's 3.4 thousand of 20.6 million. That's like 1/5,500th of the players. One player every almost 6k players got to that rating. So we're not talking about showering Mythic Plus players in loot, because the percentage of players who, for example, would be able to reach a 15 plus in this season would be less than 2%. Now, if you did implement this, where you put, the plus 15 around here, starting to give you Myth track 1, you might still have a problem of quantity, because the one constant that the Mythic Plus always has over raiding is infinite loot. As long as you have time to play, you always have loot in Mythic Plus. So obviously, the moment you would unlock Mythic Plus 15 in this example, awarding you with Myth track gear, what would happen is, at the end of week 1, every single good Mythic Plus player will be completely decked out in 623 item level gear, because they were all able to do 15 plus keys and all able to deck themselves up in this item level, which is not something a Mythic Raider can do, because their loot is limited. It's only 4 items per boss once per week. So you would have to come up with limitations with it. Blizzard would have to come up with a system, for example, saying that if you clear a 15 plus, you get 1 Myth track item. And then on week 3, you start being able to complete 2 plus 15 keys to get 2 items per week. And then on week 5, you can complete now 3 Mythic Plus 15 keys or higher to get 3 Myth track items per week. So practically trying to go at the same pace of raiding, right? The more weeks go by, the more bosses you're killing, the more bosses go on farm, the more loot is able to be distributed, right? So trying to follow that logic with Mythic Plus. That seems to have been the best suggestion right now to fix this issue. The issue that the skill expression, the rewards for your skill, your time commitment, as well as the coordination and the management of 25 people in order to defeat very hard bosses can give you the best rewards in the game, but the rewards for sometimes similar skill level in Mythic Plus stops far, far, far lower down. The fact that Mythic Plus gear is practically on the same track, on the same upgradable track as Heroic Raid is just too low. It's good, it fits for the first couple of weeks, when Heroic Raid can actually still be somewhat tough, right? But then, after that, it gets outdated very quickly. After that, Mythic Plus, as it's in its core, it's scaling endlessly. It becomes harder and harder over time. So you should follow that up with higher rewards. Even though you cap them, even though it's not endlessly spammable rewards like the early level of Mythic Plus, you could add a couple of extra levels with a couple of higher rewards. Very importantly, that at least lets you get a Myth track item, at least 1 per week, and then 2 per week, and then 3 per week, to try to keep the higher levels, the more challenging levels of Mythic Plus, more in track with their effort. The reward of those keys being more in track, similar to the rewards of Mythic Raiding, with the difficulty of Mythic Raiding. So that was the point for today, after we have highlighted the actual point of the day, which was making crafted gear more relevant in the season. We still need something tiny extra added to Mythic Plus to not make it drop off that hard later on in the season. You know, a couple of months in is where you will see the largest gap between Mythic Raiders and Mythic Plus only players. Not as we explained early on, when Mythic Raiders are still getting quite little loot, but by 1 month and a half in, Mythic Raiders will start to get, you know, further ahead than Mythic Plus only players. So that was our point for today on this Sunday, on a festivity asking for a gift from Blizzard, on slightly upping the reward system from Mythic Plus, even if capped in number, even if limited, just a tiny bit extra to keep Mythic Plus loot more relevant throughout the season. So for today, on this Sunday, we are now leaving each other. Thanks, of course, for watching the video, as usual, as well as for everyone who is supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I think it's been hot enough. I know we are entering August soon, but can we take like a 3-day break, perhaps?